growing concern when it comes to water levels at Lake Mead in southern Nevada. And some officials are anticipating the water line will take a major hit once again this year.
The drone lifts off the cracked earth at Hemenway Harbor, and what it captures in the first 30 seconds of footage stops everyone in the control room cold. Not because of what is in the water, because of what is not. Where there used to be 60 feet of dark, cold lake, there is now cracked mud, exposed rock, and silence. The kind of silence that does not belong at America's largest reservoir. The kind of silence that belongs at the end of something. You are watching that footage right now. And before this video is over, you are going to understand exactly what you are looking at and why every single person in the American Southwest should be losing sleep over it. Because this is not a story about a dry summer. It is not a story about climate change alone. It is not even a story about water. It is a story about a lie. A 102-year-old lie. One that was signed into law on a single afternoon in 1922, buried under nearly 30 million acre-feet of water for decades, and is now being exposed, foot by foot, season by season, in the most spectacular and terrifying way possible. Stay with me, because by the time this video ends, you will never look at a glass of water the same way again. And if you are watching this for the first time, hit subscribe right now, because the footage from Lake Powell upstream drops next week, and what is at the bottom of that reservoir makes what we are seeing at Lake Mead look like a warm-up act. What the drone sees. Let's start with what is actually visible in this new footage, because the numbers alone do not prepare you for it. The bathtub ring. If you have never heard that term, you are about to. Local guides around Lake Mead have been calling it that for years. A white stain on the canyon walls left behind by mineral deposits as the water line dropped. Calcium carbonate, the chemical signature of evaporation. The geological equivalent of a tide mark on a bathtub. Except this bathtub is 28 miles wide, and the ring is 175 feet tall. 175 feet. Stand at the edge of the canyon and look up. That white line near the top? That is where the water used to be. The dark rock below it? That is where the water is now. The gap between those 2 points is not a drought statistic. It is not a government report. It is not a projection from a climate model. It is an actual measurement, written in mineral deposits on an actual canyon wall that you can see with your own eyes from a drone camera in real time, and it is still climbing. Every month of below-average snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, every month of record temperatures across the Colorado River Basin, every month of unchanged consumption from the cities and farms and ranches that depend on this water, the ring moves a little higher and the water drops a little lower. But here is what the drone footage is also capturing, and this is the part that is harder to process, the part that has been pulling forensic teams from 3 states to a shoreline that has no business being a shoreline. The stuff the water left behind. Boats. Not ghost ships. Not metaphors. Actual boats. Recreational vessels that sank in the 1980s and 1990s, now sitting on dry lake bed, hulls cracked open by decades of sedimentation and exposure, names still legible on the stern, speedboats with seat cushions still in place, outboard motors still attached. A vessel from 1981 that looks like it was dropped there yesterday except for the sun-bleached fiberglass and the 1,000-yard stare of something that has been at the bottom of a lake for 40 years. There are intake structures, concrete infrastructure, designed and installed to sit permanently underwater, now standing naked in desert daylight. Picnic tables, outboard motors, the artifacts of a civilization that trusted absolutely and completely that this water was permanent. And then there are the barrels. We are going to come back to the barrels, because the barrels are where this story stops being about water policy and starts being about what happens when the things people count on never being found start turning up in the morning light. The engineering miracle that made a civilization. Before we go any further, before we talk about what is in those barrels, before we talk about the number that no official in Las Vegas will say out loud, you need to understand what Lake Mead was supposed to be, what it was built to do, and why the people who built it believed so completely that it would work. Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States. When it filled to capacity in 1983, it held 28.9 million acre-feet of water. You want to understand how much water that is? It is enough to cover the entire state of Pennsylvania in a foot of water, and still have billions of gallons left over. The Hoover Dam, completed in 1936 at the peak of the Great Depression, was at the time the largest dam ever built on Earth. It was not just an engineering achievement. It was a statement, a declaration by the United States government that the American Southwest, the brutal, burning, water-starved desert that had defeated every civilization that tried to settle it before, was going to be different this time. This time there would be infrastructure. This time there would be water. And for nearly 70 years, it worked. Lake Mead allowed Las Vegas to grow from a railroad outpost in the Mojave Desert into a city of 2.8 million people. It allowed Phoenix to become the 5th largest city in the United States. It turned the Imperial Valley of California, a stretch of desert where summer temperatures regularly exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit and annual rainfall is measured in single-digit inches, into the winter salad bowl of North America. Lettuce, broccoli, carrots, melons, produced in a place that by every natural law should produce nothing but heat and dust. The reservoir reached its all-time high in 1983. Canyon walls were invisible beneath the waterline. Marina docks floated at the tops of cliffs. The bathtub ring did not exist because the tub was full. The system appeared to be working exactly as designed. That was the peak. Now ask yourself this. And this is the question that should have been asked in 1922, and was not, and has never been properly answered since. What if the water that filled this reservoir, the water that made all of this possible, was never really there to begin with? The lie signed in Santa Fe. November 24, 1922. Bishop's Lodge, Santa Fe, New Mexico. 7 states send representatives to a single room. Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico from the upper basin. California, Arizona, Nevada from the lower basin. Presiding over the negotiations, Herbert Hoover, then Secretary of Commerce, future President of the United States, the most powerful man in the room, and the man most determined to leave it with a deal. The reason they are there is not abstract. It is not theoretical. It is a near war. California has already been diverting massive amounts of Colorado River water through the Imperial Canal to irrigate the desert farmland of the Imperial Valley. Arizona's governor has threatened to send the state militia to stop the diversions. Federal officials are intervening not because they want to, but because if they don't, 2 American states are going to start shooting at each other over water. The Colorado River Compact is designed explicitly to prevent that from happening. The engineers in the room do the calculations. They look at flow records from 1899 to 1921, 22 years of data. They calculate an average. The Colorado River, they determine, carries approximately 17.5 million acre-feet of water annually. On the basis of that number, they divide the river. 7.5 million acre-feet to the upper basin, 7.5 million to the lower basin. Additional allocations for Mexico and future growth. Everyone shakes hands. The compact is signed, and the modern American Southwest is born. Here is the problem. Are you ready for it? The years from 1899 to 1921 were not a normal period in the history of the Colorado River. They were not representative. They were not average. They were, according to research compiled over decades using tree ring analysis from bristlecone pines and other long-lived species across the basin, trees that have been growing since before the Roman Empire, their annual rings recording wet years and dry years with extraordinary precision, among the wettest years in the past 1,200 years. Read that again? 1,200 years. The engineers did not accidentally pick a wet stretch of river history. They picked the wettest stretch in over a millennium, and they treated it as the permanent baseline. The actual long-term average flow of the Colorado River, the number the tree rings reveal when you look back across 12 centuries of data, is approximately 13 million acre-feet per year. The compact promised the states 17.5 million. The river, on average across its long history, provides 13 million, that is 4.5 million acre-feet of water per year, every single year, that the compact promised and the river does not actually have. A promise made to states and cities and farms and people that was mathematically impossible to keep from the moment it was signed. And some of the men in that room at Bishop's Lodge knew it. Not all of them, but some. There were engineers present who raised concerns during the negotiations, who pointed out that 22 years was a short measurement window, who said that longer records might show different averages. Their concerns were overruled. The states wanted water. The federal government wanted peace. Herbert Hoover wanted a deal. The compact was signed. And for a century, Lake Mead absorbed the difference. Wet years filled the reservoir. Dry years drew it down. The fluctuations stayed within a manageable range. The cities grew. The farms expanded. The barrels sank deeper into the dark water at Hemenway Harbor, and nobody thought about them at all, until the water started going away. The system breaks. From 2000 to 2021, the Colorado River Basin experienced what hydrologists initially called a drought. They were using the wrong word, but we will get to that. Annual flows dropped below the long-term average. Snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, the source of the majority of the river's water, declined. Lake Mead began to fall. By 2010, the lake had dropped below 1,100 feet, a level it had not seen since it was first being filled in the 1930s. By 2015, it was below 1,080 feet. By 2021, the Bureau of Reclamation declared the first official shortage in the history of the Colorado River, a Tier 1 shortage that triggered mandatory cuts to Arizona and Nevada. By 2022, the shortage escalated to Tier 2A and the lake kept dropping. And then something shifted in the language. Federal officials stopped using the word drought. They started using a different word, a word that, once you understand what it means, changes everything about how you interpret this footage. The word is aridification. A drought is temporary. A drought ends. The rains return, the snowpack recovers, the reservoir refills, and the system resets. Every region experiences droughts. The Southwest has experienced droughts before. The compact, the dam, the infrastructure, all of it was designed with the assumption that droughts were temporary fluctuations that a large enough reservoir could absorb until the wet years returned. Aridification is not a drought. Aridification is a permanent shift in baseline conditions. It is the establishment of a new normal. It does not end. It is not a cycle. It is a transition. The Colorado River Basin, moving from one climate state to a drier one that will persist for the foreseeable future. And here is the brutal truth that the tree rings confirm. The wet period the 1922 engineers measured was the anomaly. The dry period the basin is entering now is the return to the historical mean. The drought that began in 2000 is not a drought at all. It is the end of a temporary wet period that lasted approximately a century and happened to coincide exactly with the period during which the American Southwest was built. The dry is the normal. The wet was the anomaly. And every gallon delivered to Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and the Imperial Valley for the past 100 years was borrowed against a baseline that never actually existed. Let that sink in. The two numbers on the dam. Now we get to the part that no one in Las Vegas wants to discuss at a dinner table. Hoover Dam was built to do two things: generate electricity and release water downstream to the cities and farms that depend on it. Both functions depend on water pressure. Both functions depend on the water level staying above certain critical thresholds. The engineers who designed the dam built two specific numbers into the schematic. And right now, both of them should terrify you. The first number is 950 feet. At approximately 950 feet of surface elevation, the dam's hydroelectric turbines begin losing efficiency. Water pressure drops. A phenomenon called cavitation, the formation of destructive air bubbles in the machinery, becomes a real risk. Below 950 feet, Hoover Dam's ability to generate electricity degrades rapidly. That matters because Hoover Dam provides power to approximately 1.3 million people in Nevada, Arizona, and California. It generates roughly 4 billion kilowatt-hours annually. Losing that power does not mean the lights go out necessarily. It means the power has to come from somewhere else, and the somewhere else does not currently exist at sufficient capacity. But 950 feet is not the number that keeps federal water managers awake at night. The number that does that is 55 feet lower, 895 feet. At 895 feet, Lake Mead reaches what the Bureau of Reclamation officially designates as dead pool. Not a metaphor, an official designation, a technical threshold at which the water level drops below the dam's lowest outlet works, meaning water can no longer flow through Hoover Dam by gravity at all. The reservoir becomes a bathtub with a drain higher than the water. Nothing comes out, no power, no water releases, no deliveries to the lower basin states. The Colorado River would still flow into Lake Mead. It just would not flow out. The canals, the aqueducts, the pipes, the systems that supply water to Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, the Imperial Valley, all of it goes dry. Not because the lake is empty, because the water that remains is trapped below the reach of every outlet the dam was built with. At Deadpool, 40 million people lose access to their water supply. Lake Mead currently sits approximately 50 to 60 feet above that line. In a bad year, poor snowpack, high temperatures, continued overuse, the lake can drop 20 feet or more. The lake also loses approximately 600,000 acre-feet annually to evaporation alone. Water that vanishes into desert air without ever reaching a faucet or a field. You do the math. Federal water managers are doing the math. And one city in particular has already done it and quietly built its escape. Las Vegas builds its way out. Las Vegas understood the threat before almost anyone else. This should not be surprising. Las Vegas exists entirely because of Lake Mead. The city draws 90% of its water from the reservoir. Without Lake Mead, there is no Las Vegas, not as a city of 2.8 million people, not as a global tourist destination, not as anything other than a hotspot in the Mojave Desert. In the early 2000s, as the lake began its decline, an engineer at the Southern Nevada Water Authority pulled the original intake schematics, ran the elevations, and arrived at a conclusion that did not make it into any public press release. In a Deadpool scenario, the pipes that supply Las Vegas would stop working. They were designed for a full reservoir. They sit at elevations that would be above the waterline if the lake dropped far enough. Las Vegas would not run out of water because the lake was dry. Las Vegas would run out of water because the city could not reach what was left. So they built a new pipe. In 2008, the Southern Nevada Water Authority began construction on what locals call the third straw, a new intake tunnel reaching deeper into Lake Mead than any existing infrastructure. The project took 7 years. It cost approximately $1.5 billion. It involved tunneling through underwater rock at depths and pressures that pushed the limits of available construction technology. Engineers worked in pressurized chambers 300 feet in from the lakebed under conditions where a single structural failure meant the tunnel flooded and the workers drowned. The third straw was completed in 2015. Its intake sits at approximately 860 feet, below the Deadpool threshold. Even if Lake Mead drops to levels where Hoover Dam cannot release water, even if every other city on the system is cut off, Las Vegas can still draw water through the third straw. The city spent $1.5 billion to build an escape route from a system that, officially, has not yet failed. Think carefully about what that tells you. The people closest to this problem, the engineers, the water managers, the officials who read the technical documents and run the projections did not build a $1.5 billion escape route because they thought everything was going to be fine. They built it because they did not believe it would be. And then ask yourself the obvious follow-up question. If Las Vegas built its escape route, what did Phoenix build? Phoenix has no escape. Phoenix receives approximately 40% of its water from the Central Arizona Project, a 336-mile canal system that carries Colorado River water from Lake Havasu, downstream of Lake Mead, across the desert to central Arizona. The project cost approximately $4 billion to construct. Adjusted to present value, that figure exceeds $10 billion. It is one of the most expensive water infrastructure projects in the history of the United States, and it comes with a catch that Arizona has known about since the day it signed the compact. Arizona holds junior water rights. Arizona was the last lower basin state to ratify the Colorado River Compact, holding out for years while California claimed more and more of the river's flow. When Arizona finally agreed to join, it accepted junior priority status in exchange for federal funding to build the Central Arizona Project. Junior priority means that in a shortage, Arizona gets cut first, not after California, not after Nevada. First, the 2021 Tier 1 shortage reduced Arizona's allocation by 512,000 acre-feet, approximately 18% of the state's Colorado River supply. The 2022 Tier 2 A shortage cut deeper. Phoenix has been adapting, drilling deeper groundwater wells, expanding recycled water programs, paying farmers in Pinal County to stop growing crops and fallowing fields. But none of it replaces what Lake Mead provides. The structural position is fixed. When Lake Mead drops, Arizona suffers first and worst. There is no third straw for Phoenix to build. There is no billion-dollar tunnel, no engineering escape hatch, no alternative intake waiting at the bottom of a deeper elevation. Phoenix is the fifth largest city in the United States, and it is structurally dependent on a water source that is contracting, under a legal framework that ensures it gets cut before its neighbors, from a reservoir that is 50 to 60 feet above the point of no return. And still, 80% of all Colorado River water goes to agriculture. The single largest crop by water consumption is alfalfa hay, grown in the desert, irrigated with Colorado River water, and in significant quantities loaded onto ships and exported to Saudi Arabia and China to feed livestock in countries that chose not to drain their own water resources. Las Vegas residents take shorter showers so that hay can sail to Riyadh. The Imperial Valley, California's desert agricultural powerhouse, which has been irrigating with Colorado River water since before Las Vegas existed as a city, holds senior water rights that predate the compact itself. In a shortage, the Imperial Valley does not get cut. The cities do. Does that seem like a sustainable arrangement to you? Because that is the arrangement that is currently governing water distribution to 40 million people. What the water left behind. Now let's go back to Hemenway Harbor, back to the drone footage, back to the cracked mud and the things emerging from it. Since 2020, as Lake Mead has receded, it has been returning things that were lost. Not in the sense of recovery, in the sense of revelation. Boats from the 1980s and 1990s now sit on exposed lakebed, their hulls cracked open by decades of pressure and now bleaching in desert sun. The names of the people who owned them are still readable on the stern. Concrete intake structures are visible above the waterline for the first time since they were installed. Picnic tables, outboard motors, a speedboat from 1981 with the seat cushions still in place. And then, in May 2022, boaters at Hemenway Harbor spotted something different. A corroded metal drum embedded in newly exposed lakebed, visible above the surface of the receding water for the first time in decades. They flagged down a National Park Service ranger. Within hours, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police were on scene with a forensic recovery team working a stretch of shoreline that had been 60 feet underwater 2 years earlier. The remains inside the barrel were estimated to date to the late 1970s or early 1980s. based on artifacts recovered alongside them. The body showed signs of a gunshot wound. The barrel was consistent with disposal methods associated with organized crime activity in Las Vegas during that era, a city that, in its earlier incarnation, was deeply connected to mob operations, illegal money flows, and the kind of business arrangements where people who caused problems were sometimes made to disappear into very deep water. The case remains open. The person responsible, if still alive, is now in their 70s or 80s. 6 days later, a second barrel surfaced. More remains, then more barrels, more bones, more forensic teams working a shoreline that keeps growing as the water keeps receding. Lake Mead, it turns out, had been functioning as a disposal site. Deep water, remote location, the absolute certainty, the kind of certainty that only comes when a body of water the size of a small sea is sitting on top of your secrets, that no one would ever look. The lake has been looking back ever since, and here is what makes the barrels the most precise metaphor for everything happening to the Colorado River system right now. For decades, problems were dumped into Lake Mead and covered by water. The gap between allocations and actual flow covered. The overpromises to states, to cities, to farmers covered. The legal fiction that the compact had secured enough water for everyone who needed it covered. The lake was deep enough and dark enough and cold enough that none of it needed to be dealt with. Now, the lake is receding, and everything hidden is becoming visible. The barrels are not the worst thing this water is going to surface. No path back. The truth that water managers acknowledge in technical documents, if not always in public statements, is stark and unambiguous. Lake Mead may never recover. Recovery would require sustained wet years. Years where snowpack across the Rocky Mountains significantly exceeded the historical average. Years where the Colorado River carried more than 13 million acre-feet of water annually. Building the reservoir back up faster than consumption and evaporation draw it down. Climate models do not project those years. Climate models project continued warming, declining snowpack, and a Colorado River basin that becomes progressively drier over the coming decades. Aridification is not a reversible condition. It is a structural shift, and it interacts with the existing system in ways that make everything worse simultaneously. Hotter temperatures mean faster evaporation from the reservoir surface. Earlier snowmelt means runoff occurs before soil can absorb it and before storage infrastructure can capture it efficiently. And declining snowpack means there is less total water entering the system at its source. The infrastructure built to manage the 20th century river is no longer adequate for the 21st century river. The gap between legal allocations, 17.5 million acre-feet, and actual long-term river flow, 13 million acre-feet, is not a policy problem that can be solved by conservation campaigns or water-efficient appliances. It is a structural deficit that must eventually be addressed at the level of the compact itself. The compact has never been renegotiated, not once. In 102 years of operation, not a single provision of the Colorado River Compact has been formally revised to account for what the tree rings reveal, what the climate models project, or what the bathtub ring makes undeniable from drone altitude. The question that water managers and federal officials are grappling with right now is not whether the system will be restructured. It is already failing in slow motion. The restructuring is already underway in the form of mandatory cuts and emergency conservation agreements and billion-dollar tunnel projects. The question is whether the restructuring happens through deliberate planning or through crisis. A planned restructuring looks like this: renegotiating the compact, reducing agricultural allocations, retiring water rights, accepting that the population and economy of the American Southwest cannot continue to expand indefinitely on the basis of water that does not exist. A crisis restructuring looks like this. Lake Mead hits 895 feet. Hoover Dam goes silent. Phoenix and Las Vegas compete for emergency supply. Fields go fallow not by farmer choice but by necessity. 40 million people learn in real time, through their faucets, their showers, their irrigation systems, their power grids, that the water they built their lives around was always borrowed. The gap between those two futures is currently 50 to 60 feet of lake elevation. In a bad year, the lake drops 20 feet. So here is where things stand right now. Las Vegas built its escape route. The farmers are being paid to conserve. The federal government is pouring billions into short-term fixes and voluntary agreements. The conversation is happening in technical documents, in emergency planning rooms, in the hallways of federal agencies whose names most people cannot name. But the structural problem has not changed. The compact promised water that does not exist. Lake Mead absorbed the difference for a century. Lake Mead cannot absorb it anymore. The white ring on the canyon walls is 175 feet tall and still climbing. Every month of unchanged consumption, every month of below-average snowpack, every month of desert evaporation pushes the surface a little lower and the ring a little higher. The number that matters is not the height of the ring. The number that matters is 895. Below that line, the dam stops. The deliveries stop. The cities stop. The lake currently sits 50 to 60 feet above that line. The boats are on dry land. The barrels are open. The forensic teams are still cataloging what comes up from the mud at Hemenway Harbor. And what surfaced in May 2022 is not the worst thing this lake is going to surface in the years ahead. Because upstream, 300 miles north of Hoover Dam, the second largest reservoir in America is dropping faster than Lake Mead, Lake Powell. And what is at the bottom of Lake Powell? The canyons that were drowned when the reservoir filled in 1963. The structures that were left behind, the things buried under 300 feet of water for 60 years and never expected to see daylight again. That is the next chapter of this story. And the next chapter is already being written into federal emergency planning documents. Subscribe now. The Lake Powell footage drops next week. The aftermath at Mead is the warning. Powell is what happens when the warning goes unheeded. Drop 102 in the comments. That is how many years this system has been running on water that was never really there. And if this footage showed you something you needed to see, share this video right now, because 40 million people depend on a river they have never had to think about before. They are going to have to start thinking about it very soon.